Welcome to Elevate Pod, where we elevate your mindset, inspire your spirit, and ignite your leadership journey. This podcast is brought to you by Elevate Leadership Services. My name is Pearl.
And I'm Chibwechungu.
We are the co-founders of Elevate Leadership Services and the hosts of Elevate Pod. The Elevate Pod is dedicated to inspiring and empowering listeners, focusing on minorities and immigrants. We offer valuable tools, resources, and pathways to foster personal and professional development.
Thank you very much, Pearl. It's really an honor for us today at Elevate Pod to interview Dr. Elizabeth Adetiba. And she's going to actually share her personal thoughts and also our experiences on a subject that matters to every one of us. The change in higher education and rise of AI in the era of increasingly unaffordable college tuition. For generations, higher education has been viewed as one of the most reliable pathways to opportunity and economic freedom or mobility. Yet today, many students and families are questioning whether a college degree remains worth the growing financial burden that we are all seeing. At the same time, artificial intelligence is transforming how we learn, how we work, and how we access information and the speed within which that information is accessible. As tuition costs continue to rise and technology advances are at an unprecedented pace, we must all ask, what is the future of higher education and who will access it? That's the question that we all have to ponder. But before we start discussing the topic of today, let me give you a short bio that Dr. Elizabeth Adetiba shared with us. Dr. Adetiba is an early career researcher and assistant professor at the Department of Black Studies at the University of Rochester in New York. Dr. Adetiba earned a PhD in sociology from Columbia University, where she specialized in historical sociology, science, knowledge, and technology, and medical sociology. Her research career extends from the US to South Africa to New Zealand, where she was in 2018. She is a recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship, and also the National Science Foundation supported her work. Above all, Dr. Adetiba is a critical writer, having worked as a journalist and fact checker before pursuing her doctoral studies. Her writing has been featured in HuffPost, Slate, The Nation, Saloon, SB Nation, and the Black Youth Project. And you can find her most recent public articles on our website at www.elizabethadetiba.com professional writing. Her research focuses on investigating how historical construction of blackness and more so anti-blackness shape scientific thinking across a range of social domains, from medical to epidemiological scholarship to athletics to intergovernmental organization. Her current book project explores the presence of anti-Black sentiment in the medical scholarship concerning the origins of HIV/AIDS epidemics and its widespread impact on global AIDS policy. Dr. Adetiba, do you have anything you'd like to add before we forge into our conversation?
No, I just like to say thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to delving into this topic with you.
Thank you.
The promise of higher education has always been rooted in possibility, the possibility of growth, of advancement, and of a better future. Yet, for many students, that promise feels increasingly out of reach as tuition costs soar. Meanwhile, AI is redefining what it means to learn, to solve problems, and to acquire skills. Today, with our honored guests, we explore how higher education can adapt to these realities while preserving its essential mission of developing thoughtful, capable, and engaged citizens. So let's dive in, Dr. Elizabeth, with my very first question for the day. From your vantage point as a professor, how have you seen higher education evolve in the past decade, particularly in terms of access, affordability, and even student preparedness?
Mhm. From what I've seen over the past 10 or so years in higher education, access to education has expanded, right? As um, there are more programs that, have been created to um, encourage students from low income backgrounds, inner city backgrounds, and even sort of more rural areas in the country to encourage them to attain some form of higher education, whether it be sort of a 2 year community college associate's degree or a 4 year degree from a major college or university. At the same time, we have seen the financial access decrease as tuition and really just the entire cost of attendance has increased significantly. So while there may be more, I guess, administrative resources to assist young people, and not even just young people, people of all ages who have some sort of interest in attending college. I think that we've made it very financially inaccessible for them because of the high cost. Um, there have been different sort of programs. Many universities will have some sort of blanket um, zero tuition sort of policy for households that make under a certain amount of money. But that often excludes a significant amount of what we would term the middle class. Um, I also think that in terms of student preparedness, I mean it's been a quite a decline. Students are coming to college with less and less critical thinking experience. They have been sort of hamstrung by the public education system in this country, and even students who have attended private schools, right? Um, Across the board, they're coming to college with lower reading abilities, with lower math abilities. And so it's been shocking, I think, almost to see, right? As someone who I've worked as a TA for a long time prior to finishing my graduate my graduate studies. And so my first class I TA'd was in 2019. And the type of college freshman that I taught in 2019 um, was way more prepared than the college freshman that I taught in 2026.
Wonderful. Wow, that's alarming. I think I just want to ask a follow-up question, especially when you see, for me, it's more on critical thinking. I think I've seen it. I see it even in the people who are getting the highest degrees. That I think the critical thinking is it's within that box. I think if anything goes outside, then it's become too cloudy for them to contemplate on that.
Mhm.
So, as a young career professor, what do you think is causing the lack of critical thinking for many of the people that are attending colleges or that have even attended higher degrees?
Oof, this is a question that I think
Just your thought, your
could
thought.
be answered in so many different ways.
Mhm,
My personal thoughts have to do with the decline in the emphasis on literacy in this country. Um, Young people, both now and, I would say maybe ever since 2006,
mhm,
7, whenever the first sort of iPad or tablet was sort of created, I think the younger generations are finding themselves in front of screens earlier and earlier. And child development specialists, psychologists, they have discussed the sort of neurological issues in child development as a result of looking at screens all day, right? It's too much stimuli. It's way too much external stimuli for growing brains to process. And so it ends up just overwhelming the system. Oftentimes, young people find themselves in front of screens before they have even learned to read, right? And when that happens, they sort of feel like, why would I read this book when I could just watch a video that talks about whatever was in the book? And even thinking beyond young college aged people, right? Um, we have a declining emphasis on literacy amongst adults, right? We've seen sort of the death of physical newspapers. And even over the past decade, we saw, a sharp rise in sort of the online magazine, the online newspaper. But so many of those publications have, in their terms, pivoted to video. And so people aren't even reading the news as much as they used to. They're watching videos, they're listening to news podcasts, maybe watching TV shows about the news. And so um, they spend less time engaging with the sort of actual material themselves on like a first person basis. And I fundamentally believe that any society in which reading is deprioritized will have pretty severe critical thinking issues amongst all the people who live there. I mean, there's an article published sometime in 2025 by a professor at Columbia. I believe it was published in the Atlantic, and he talked about how you know, when you think about a college student who's going to an Ivy League university, you think, well, these students are the cream of the crop, right?
mhm, mhm,
But a lot of them were getting to college and complaining about the level of reading and the amount of reading. And, they would say, hey, the last time I read a book in its entirety was maybe in middle school, right? And so when they are assigned books to read in, their entirety over a 1 week or 2 week time span, they get so overwhelmed and sort of perturbed, even sometimes even like irritated with you as the professor. And I really do think that it has all sort of stemmed from a devaluation of reading and literacy, in addition to burnout, right? Americans have to work more and more and more hours just to be able to get by. Uh, I think it's at this point standard for the average American to have multiple jobs, right? A main job, a part-time job. Some people are getting by off of, stringing together 2 to 3 part-time jobs, and the mental exhaustion, in addition to the physical exhaustion, I think leads to a situation in which when people do get back from work, they may not have the sort of mental energy to engage with their children, to read to their children, to encourage their children to read. People are tired. They maybe just want to like sit on the couch and watch reruns of Grey's Anatomy, right? And so I think those things are sort of those, the devaluation of literacy and the burnout, I think work hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree with your thoughts. I think for many of us who are parents, some of us I think our children have grown, but for the young parents, especially when you echo about the burnout, when you come, the TV becomes the easier things. The tablet becomes the easiest babysitter. So sometimes you can't fault them, but the impact is having is really having kids who are sort of working within this square instead of broadening their thinking and imagining. Yeah. So I don't know how we can bring that up, especially in this time of the AI. But let me go back to, besides AI, let's talk about the rise in cost that is part of this education system, which actually allows not everybody to be able to afford. So for you, is at what point does the rising cost of tuition begin to really undermine the very mission that higher education has? Where do you see the end comes in
Mhm.
as a professor?
I think in order to sort of understand this crisis of tuition in higher education, um, it's probably important for us to sort of revisit the history of this, right? And so prior to the 1980s, right, late 1970s, early 1980s, um, college tuition was pretty much affordable for anyone who wanted to go, right? You could get a part-time job somewhere, maybe at a fast food restaurant, and pay your tuition, right? If not all of it, you could get most of it paid for. What happened in the 1980s was really a political backlash to the fact that so many of the protest movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s were sort of led by college students, right? By women, by Black people, by Hispanic people, right? And there was a sense that we've got to punish these radical college kids, right? And we've got to keep institutions of higher education from evolving into just sort of bastions of radicalism. And so the financing, right, of higher education was completely like reworked, particularly under the Reagan administration. And that's when we see the cost of attendance of university just start to increase higher and higher and higher. As time went on, the 90s and early 2000s, many universities became real estate proprietors,
Mongers, yeah.
right? If you sort of ask anyone in New York City, right, who is the biggest owner of real estate in New York City, they'll either tell you Columbia University or NYU, New York University. And it's true, right? Those are the two biggest owners of land, of real estate in New York City. And that's going to be the same thing with places like University of Chicago, Yale, Northwestern. We see that Northeastern University has actually purchased universities on the West Coast that have been struggling financially. And so once universities started to get into the real estate game, we also see that the salaries for upper admin in universities have ballooned, right? The average university president in this country makes well over $1 million a year. Um, Salaries for sports coaches, right? Head coaches, right, at these universities have also ballooned. Um, and so this happens as sort of financial retribution towards the working class for their sort of successful organizing and activism in the sort of mid 20th century. But also the way student loans have operated, right, have sort of, I mean, Americans owe, what is it, over $1 trillion in student loan debt?
More than that, probably.
Yeah, and it's an incredible amount of money, and this is debt that if you file for bankruptcy, every other debt will be cleared except for your student loans. In some cases, these loans get inherited by people's children after they pass away, right? And so in some ways a debt bondage system that keeps a significant part of the U.S. Financial institutions afloat, right? And so when we think about the rising costs of tuition, we could have low cost or even free tuition if we wanted to. There is no political will because of the because of both the political reasons behind the sort of reworking of how college is financed, in addition to the sort of central role that student debt plays in operating as a buoy in the economy.
All right. Thank you. Wow. So I think we don't see any in the foreseeable future with the information that we have to see anything going down.
Well, we're actually, in my opinion, I think we're at a breaking point in higher education, right? What we're seeing is a demographic decline, right? Because fewer and fewer people are having children, and
Mm-hmm.
those who do have children, right, you're very rarely seeing a family of with 4 or 5 children, right? When people do have children, it's one, it's two. If you're really well to do nowadays, you could have three, right? And so the number of children who grow up to be, college age adults is
Mm-hmm.
just lower than it has been, right? For, in the past few decades. Every single university in this country is scrambling because of that, right? They don't know what to do because even if we have rates of college attendance stay the same, right? Just by having a lower sort of overall, young adult population, it's going to lead to less revenue. But we also have more young people who are realizing I don't have to I can go to trade school. I can become a plumber. I can become an electrician. I can go work out on an oil rig. I can do all sorts of things. So, um, I I don't know what the future of the financing of higher education is going to look like. I think there are people who get paid a lot more than I do to really tackle this particular um, issue. But from my vantage point, I think we're nearing that point where things just sort of like break and we either um, reconstitute higher education in a way that's more sustainable and accessible, or higher education returns to its roots, right, in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, in which only the ultra wealthy can
Elite.
afford to send their children to colleges and universities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are there, and I think that question need to be addressed. And I think the younger ones are the ones who are going to address it. I think you are the ones who are going to lead I think the answers, who are going to craft, who are going to reimagine how this is going to be done. Because many of us, I think we have a few years. All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that. Okay.
Now, I'd like to know what your opinion is with regard to preparing students for the realities of today's workforce. So, with all that you've said, do you think universities are still preparing students for the realities of today's workforce, or are they lagging behind industry needs?
I think some universities are doing a good job of preparing students for the workforce. Some aren't. And I'll expand on that, in that the workforce has become so volatile and unpredictable over the past even just 2 years, right? And I think that it's very difficult for universities to be able to predict the specific sort of degrees, right, that can enable students to get good jobs, and be successful. For a long time, um, society was pushing STEM. Get a degree in something STEM related, engineering, math, etc. But what's happened is that we've seen engineers be laid off left and right, as a result of the AI boom, right? And so students are thinking, well, what's the purpose, right? And what am I going to study then, right? And I think that the universities that are doing it well are the ones that are encouraging their students to major in the things that interest them, that inspire them, and that cultivate critical thinking. And so, if that is art history, right, I think it's important for people to study art history, to be able to look at things, artifacts from the past, and sort of detail how certain paintings capture certain sort of historical um, sort of shifts, right? At its core, that's a skill that requires you to look at a piece of evidence, right, and sort of trace the process by which this thing was created, by which this painting was created. And I think that no matter what students major in, as long as they're truly engaging in critical thinking in college, I think that they can be successful in most careers, right? Whether it's going to law school and practicing law, whether it's working in a nonprofit field, whether it's working in education, whether it's even business and entrepreneurship, right? As long as students have that critical thinking basis, I think I think those students will graduate college and be fine. There are other universities that I see are essentially, they've sort of kowtowed completely to AI. And so they are allowing students to integrate AI everywhere in hopes that their students can be hired as specialists in AI. So they know how to tell the sort of algorithm what to do, right?
But they can't
But they're
write.
not, yeah, they're not sort of understanding why is it that I'm telling the algorithm
Mm.
to do this in this way? Why is it that we want this sort of result? And if the computer had some sort of issue, right, could I actually go and do the task that I'm commanding this computer to do, right? Can I go back and do this on my own? And I think if students aren't walking away being able to answer those questions, then universities that are deeply integrating artificial intelligence into their curriculum in hopes that, their students will be the lucky ones to be hired as the AI programmers. I just don't think that's a successful or sustainable long-term solution.
Okay. What I'm hearing from you is you're not saying that AI is bad, but what you're saying that in light of the AI, we need to have critical thinking. We need to incorporate it, but we have to develop students not only to plug something and get the output, but get students who can look at it and say, does this make sense? Can I do it myself? And I think when you mentioned about algorithms, very few people now, because before you had to know what is A squared is equal to B squared, the X and everything else. But today, those algorithms, they are being, AI, you can tell it and it speaks for you immediately. And all of us are using AI. And now I would like to know from your perspectives, because AI is changing the way people teach. AI is changing the way people access information. AI is changing the way students engage. How for yourself as a professor, and who I think realizes that as much as AI has potential, there is a piece that's missing. How do you use this AI, and how would you encourage others to use AI such that it can be beneficial as well? Or how are you
Mhm.
using
So I don't use AI at all.
it?
Um, I think aside from higher education, I think the real world um, ecological impact of this increased use of artificial intelligence is it's scary and it's not sustainable, right? We're seeing these data centers being built in different areas around the country. And even if they are within, maybe 5 miles away from, homes or, apartment complexes, et cetera, already we have seen that there has been an increase in um, sort of pollution, air pollution that is already leading to higher rates of cancer, right? In areas that have a data center within sort of 5 to 10 miles. Granted, some of this is because there aren't strict enough regulations around these data centers. We think about sort of the issue of water access and water pollution with data centers. It's a huge problem. At the same time, we know that there are people who are sort of creating, in the process of creating alternative methods of cooling, right, for these sort of supercomputers that don't require fresh water. Again, if there are no sort of state mandates that they push for these alternatives, then the pollution is only going to get worse. But I think so far, I haven't found that there's anything that I would ask the computer to do that I feel like I can't do on my own, right? And I sort of always sort of felt this way, even before the rise of sort of this new era of AI. Graphing calculators, right, did a lot of people's math for them. And I remember being in high school and taking algebra classes and geometry classes, and even in college, taking statistics courses in which the teachers and professors would not let you use a graphing calculator, right? You had to know what you were doing. You had to be able to truly understand the rationale behind why you were solving for this, right? Calculating the distance between these 2 points on the parabola, so to speak. And I think I just got used to that, right? I like the sort of challenge um, that it gives my brain. I think I also saw that study that Harvard scholars did, believe it was published last summer, in which they're finding that people who rely more heavily on AI, you could actually see changes to the gray matter in their brain and like the way it's sort of affecting the um, quickness of their sort of like their frontal cortexes. That scared the crap out of me.
So you say I'm staying away for that.
I was like, you know what? I need to be as sharp as possible because I spend a lot of time on a screen, right? I may not have been a screen kid. Shout out to my mom for implementing the rule where we weren't allowed to watch television on weekdays, right? So I don't necessarily watch television that much because I didn't grow up watching a ton of television, but I spend a lot of time on my phone or on my computer, FaceTiming people. I'm watching reels on Instagram. I'm watching YouTube videos, right? And we know that that also has an impact on like the brain. And so for me, I'm okay, I can only do one. I can't risk it by doing both. There are some times where I sort of thought, you know, uh, what if AI could write these letters of recommendation for me so I didn't have to spend, days writing them? And I have some colleagues who are like, look, I use AI to do the sort of grunt work so I have more time and mental energy to do the work that requires more critical thinking, like writing, for example. And I think that's very fair. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, I I teach my classes in a way in which I want very little AI use. So for their assignments, I want them to write their raw reflections. I don't want them to ask chat because all chat is going to tell me is sort of an amalgamation of other people's thoughts that have already been sort of published.
Mhm.
And so some of my students, they get sort of frustrated with my class and my classes and, the requirements, but I do think that it makes them better thinkers and learners. And so in the future, if they do want to use AI for a part of an assignment, right? At least they have some sort of critical thinking basis that they've developed. So that's my approach. I may be a little bit of a Luddite in terms of like, oh, I don't want to use all this newfangled technology. But I do think that there are ways to incorporate it that are ethical and that don't destroy people's critical thinking. I mean, some of the most skilled mathematicians in the world, right? They've got these sort of fanciest graphing calculators that exist. However, when you ask them the theory behind the formulas and how they arrived at certain numbers, they can still tell you how they arrived there. So I think it's that balance that a lot of people struggle with, and I think we've got to push more for in society.
Okay. So I hear you. What you're saying is AI is good, but critical thinking is critical.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. AI is helpful. Critical thinking is always going to be the priority, at least where I'm standing.
Yeah. And I think if whenever you write even AI, I do use AI for sure, I can tell you. And I find that I can take my picture here and I tell it what I want to do and it can change. However, AI is also saying that you guys, AI can be wrong. So no matter how much, if you just take it and just plug it over there, you have to read everything, every word that it gives you.
Yes.
And that's why critical thinking comes. Is this what I want to say? And then you have to be, because you have to apply yourself. You have to say, is this really, does it reflect like anything that's said out there, or does it reflect something that I can say? So, and that's where tweaking a lot of things, people who are using AI creatively and who are using it very well are really using their minds, and they're being critical about what it's outputting out there. Yes.
Mhm.
Right. Thank
Yeah,
you.
very nice response.
Yeah.
It's good to hear your thoughts around AI with your experience with teaching, engaging students, and assessing students. I, for one, completed my graduate degree before the use of AI. So I've been very curious about what that is doing in the learning environment. So I'm liking your intentionality on putting critical thinking at the forefront because AI can be anything you make it to be.
Yes.
And I see how it can have an effect on the brain, like you're saying. Either you have it think for you, and you can tell, at least for now, if you're having it think for you or having it help brainstorm.
Mhm.
But I'm just, intrigued by how you're assessing students and how you're able to just crack it and know whether, they're getting it or they're just using AI. So.
Yeah.
That must be an interesting space for you as professors. Now, having said that, what are the most critical skills do you believe students must develop in this era, in order to stay relevant, in order to sharpen the critical thinking and all those skills that will keep them grounded no matter how things change? What are those critical things that you're teaching the students, the things that you believe they must be able to develop for them to go beyond just academic knowledge?
Sure. I mean, one of the primary things that I teach my students is um, understanding that issues that occur in the present day do not occur in sort of a historical vacuum, right? And so it's crucial for them to understand the sort of how we got there part, right? And so I teach lots of courses on epidemics and biomedicine. And one of the things I love to do at the beginning of the semester, I love to ask my students, what does it mean to be healthy, right? And they give me their responses, and they'll say you need to be at a particular weight, right? You need to eat particular things. You need to avoid eating particular things. You need to do this much exercise, this and this and this. And then I ask them, okay, how did you know this, right? And they'll say, oh, well, it's because this institution says this, right? Or all the doctors say this, right? Okay, how did the doctors arrive that information? And they're thinking, what does it matter, right? If that's what the doctors learned, then it must be correct. And I have to teach
Mm,
them the history of biomedicine in this country is dark, right? And it's not only a history that is steeped in racism and misogyny, it's actually sort of a system of learning that is steeped in pseudoscience, right? Um, one of my favorite sort of weeks to teach on is about fat phobia and the history of the BMI. And I'll have students, I'll ask them, how is BMI calculated, right? Oh, it's, a calculation in which and it's like, no, it's just weight over height. It's just weight
Simple.
over height. And I'll tell them, like, do you know that the scientist who created the sort of BMI measurement wasn't actually a practicing physician? And they'll say, wait,
What?
what? You know, and they all get sort of shocked, and this idea of sort of excess weight, right? And I have to teach them that, like, excess weight is not always, and it's not even most of the time, um, a cause
Mhm.
of, sort of metabolic disorders like diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure. In fact, it is a result, right? We have to think about epigenetics and how things are inherited
Mhm.
from one generation to another. We have to think about the food people eat, right? I remember reading on Reddit a few years ago, um, an epidemic of quote unquote epidemic of loss of young women who were talking about how they'd been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and they didn't understand because they were skinny, right? They're like, I'm a skinny diabetic. How does this make sense? Well, it's because we have wrongfully taught people that type 2 diabetes is only or even mostly seen in people who are severely overweight, right? You could have insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes at any weight. And so I have to sort of teach them the history of how we got to certain knowledge, right? Certain conventional knowledge, particularly around the body and health and medicine. And that's always the week where like you could almost see like their brains like working. They're, well, if this isn't rooted in like hard empirical data, then what about this? And it's like, yes, these are the questions that we've got to start asking ourselves. I think the second thing that I really push for my students to come away from my classes having sort of mastered is um, the relationship between sort of the argument and the empirical data, right? They have got to know what the empirical data says. They've got to be able to interpret it. And they've got to be able to assess these theoretical claims, these arguments,
Mhm.
in relation to theoretical data, what the data says, what it doesn't say,
Yes.
right? I need them to be able to read a graph and tell me exactly what the graph says without getting into things that the graph is not concretely saying. That's when we get into, oh, there might be a confounded effect, right? This thing might be a confounded variable. The data suggests that X may lead to Y, right? But they've got to know the difference between saying that and stating that without a shadow of a doubt, there is concrete proof, right? And even sort of knowing that, the most frustrating thing about science is that you could run a study in 1999
Yes.
and walk away thinking, okay, well, these are the concrete results of the study. 20 years later, circumstances have changed, computing methods have become more sophisticated. You could run that same study and find, actually, we got the causal mechanism completely wrong, right? You have to be able to know that within this particular context of this study, here are the sort of empirical results, and that things could change in the future as time goes on. And so those are the things that they've got to be able to know, even for those of them who don't go into medicine or any sort of scientific career. Um, there are a lot of things being published online, a lot of things being said by people in, the media that they've got to be able to analyze critically and assess, like, of all the data that exists on this topic, does that actually support what this person is saying on the TV, or what this politician is saying, right? These are the skills that I think are transferable outside of the classroom, and that would make them not just successful in careers, but would also make them good citizens as well.
Wonderful. Again, you're going back to critical thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I agree. I am in science, and you cannot interpret what was done in the 2000 and say, I'm going to get the same results. The environment has changed. Even
Yeah.
on the same plot that you maybe planted last year, It's going to be very, very different because the environment, the micro and macro environments are not going to be the same. So
Mhm.
I'm so happy to hear that you continue to challenge your students. And as a young career, I think, Professor, this is what we need. We need people who can take them and allow them to start thinking beyond the circumstances within which they are operating. And with that, I think we're going to raise good citizenship because
Yes.
it is not what it think it is. It's not, you cannot just go to conclusions because they are, what are their hypotheses? What are the assumptions that you made prior to all these things before you had this? I remember when I used to teach statistics, and some people would say, oh, I need to make sure that I prove that the hypothesis is right. I said, no, 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 no. The hypothesis can be wrong. And you can prove that it's wrong as well. It's
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
that it's right all the time. And that's why people force data
Yes.
to suit the hypothesis. No matter what you find, you try to say, no, it's not significant. Yes, not significant is okay. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. So
Yes.
it's good to hear what you're saying. Thank you so much for all this. I think your students will really treasure you when they are in the middle of nowhere and they
Mhm.
are able to solve a problem with very little resources.
I
Or
hope.
if they have those resources and they can really find their resources and find how they can get to those resources. Yes, not everybody, but you have one person, and that one person is a world to you.
Yes, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I think this is a very good topic, and we unfortunately time is not constantly with us. So I think I have one question, and before Pearl asks the last question, I think for you as a professor, one of the questions that I would like to ask you is about the how professors preserve curiosity and how professors can continue to preserve originality and also, I think, deep thinking in the age of AI and in the age where we can get, I can put in and get instant gratification with the answers that I have.
Mhm.
So, how do you think these students are going to benefit besides what you're doing? Where else? I think other professors, what do you think they can do to continue this curiosity?
I think
Because
a lot.
AI is here to stay.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of professors, um, they have got to put themselves in a position of vulnerability,
Mhm.
right? And that means that maybe if you've taught a class, if you taught the same class for the past 10 years, right? And you're finding that it's not interesting, this younger generation of students, sometimes that means that you have to come up with a new class, right? And that's something that a lot of my fellow professors don't like doing, right? Planning a new class takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And it means sometimes you have to read something before you can decide whether it's good enough to put on your syllabus, right? And assign it to your students. And um, as someone in the sort of beginning stages of my career, I'm doing a lot of this course prep now. And I often hear from mentors, colleagues, they say, "Oh, you're doing this now, but you won't really ever have to do it again throughout your career." And I'm thinking, no,
Why not?
that's not true, right? Because I imagine things are going to change. If I have a career that's as long as I would want it to be, I don't know what the state of biomedicine is going to look like 20 years from now. And maybe I wouldn't want to teach a class that's outdated, that students are finding boring, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think they also have to do different sorts of activities in their class. The traditional, oh, I'm going to lecture and read off of my slides and you're going to write it down. That's not working anymore, right? Particularly amongst generations where it seems like everybody has some sort of attention span issue, right? And so I challenge myself by incorporating new activities. And so instead of a final paper assignment this past semester, I had my students actually do creative projects. And so I let them work in groups to record podcast episodes. Some of them did short films. Some of them recorded like TikTok style videos, get ready with me while I explain the maternal mortality crisis in the United States, right? And so they were creative projects that required them to do work. It required them to actually know what they were going to say,
Mhm,
right? I required them to engage with at least three of the readings
mhm,
from the semester. And so they couldn't just ask Chat GPT to come up with a script for them, right?
mhm,
Because they had to demonstrate their knowledge of the readings that I had assigned. Um, I also had my students do a debate, right? And so we talked about the attempt by the former mayor in New York, Michael Bloomberg, to ban sodas, right? Or to implement a soda tax on sodas that were above, I think, maybe 28 ounces. And I split the classroom up into people who were in favor of it versus people who were not in favor of it. And I set up like a Lincoln Douglas style debate where they presented their case.
mhm,
They went back, they had maybe about 7 minutes to work with their team to come up with a rebuttal to the other side. They presented their closing arguments. And from those activities, I can assess who's participating, who has done the readings,
mhm,
right? By, how they incorporate the data from the readings into their debate cases versus who is kind of struggling when it's time for them to sort of present their argument. Um, that is not the typical way that a classroom is run, and it does require going to different trainings from different, pedagogy centers, teaching-based centers. And when you are a scholar and you have a PhD and you're like, I've been teaching college students, I don't need these people to tell me how to do my job, right? It can be easy to fall into that trap, but that's the best way to keep students engaged. And when you keep them engaged, you can almost certainly sort of get them to learn and to think critically. So that's what I do in my courses. A lot of students enjoy taking these courses because they know it's going to be sort of
engaging,
engaging in a different style of
stimulating,
course,
stimulating.
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 There are some students who, all they want to do is, come to class and just write down the notes. And so sometimes they're like, I didn't sign up for this. I don't want to, I don't want to talk to the person sitting next to me about their thoughts on the reading and share it with the class. And so, um, I think it's going to require students also to be open-minded, but I definitely think that these strategies, we've seen that they work. And if higher education is going to survive the next few decades, it's going to require more and more professors to be able to engage with their students in that way.
I think what I hear is we need professors that have to reinvent themselves.
Yes.
And reinventing is asking the question is how are we going to build and develop the next generation? Because the train is on the track and the train is not going to stop. The train is going to continue going forward, but we are the ones who have to maybe slow it down, train ourselves whilst we're training the students. And I'm so happy to hear how inventive you are, how innovative you are, because teaching requires that. And in today's world, where attention deficit is very minimal, not only for the students, I think all of us, including
Yes.
myself, is I'll be working on something and I'm working on the other thing and I'm saying, yeah. And when you talk about students in terms of taking notes, I remember, I think my son said, we have professors who engage us and we don't want to miss their classes. And we have professors, we don't need to go to their classes. All we need is to go
Just
and take the
copy that.
slides and copy the
Right.
notes. And for that, I'm saying, why are you not going to classes? Why should I be going to that class? I'm not learning anything.
Wow.
Right.
No, but it's true because what are they giving them? They're giving them notes. Copy this and you go forward. Whereas
Mhm.
the other person, like what you're, Elizabeth, what you're tackling is get engaged, motivate them. But what you're also stimulating is ideas in those kids, the capability. What can they do with this biomedical sociology? What can they do with this biomedical engineering besides what it's supposed to do? I think I can spin out and do something else with it.
Yes.
So it's really motivating, but also creating and innovating them so that they can think outside. Again, I talk about outside the box because I see many people of us operate within these four walls. But you're
Mhm.
allowing them to cross those boundaries that very few are. And keep up the good work because we need more professors like here to reinvent and invent ourselves as leaders.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it so much.
So, a few closing remarks or question that you could leave as remarks to our audience. Um, we've said so much about AI, about keeping traditional learning models. In your last words in response to this question, if you might add, I'm sure this question is sitting in some of our, in the minds of some of our audience in here. What are your thoughts on, or how are you handling plagiarism, maintaining originality? Should universities partner with AI as a core part of education and, still maintain originality, or how do we set those boundaries?
Oof.
Lauded.
This is quite a question. I mean, every semester I have to deal with plagiarism issues, right? And it's only getting worse and worse because students come to college having used AI to get through high school. And so there's very much so a disconnect between students and many college professors on what even counts as plagiarism, right?
Yeah.
Um, I I warn my students at the beginning of the semester, I have it in bold in the syllabus, that if you use AI on an assignment, you will get points
Deducted.
taken off. You will immediately drop down to the next letter grade. So if you submitted an assignment that garnered a 95, right? But I figure out that you used AI, you're going to, an 80 something, right? Um, there are students who, I mean, it's just that age of being, a young adult. You're still a few years from a fully developed, you know, frontal lobe. And so they always think that they can outsmart the professor, right? Oh, this professor is
No.
never going to be able to
Mhm.
tell that I used AI. It's actually quite easy to tell that they used AI, especially when you look at one of my hacks is that I have discussion and participation count for a pretty significant part of their overall grade. And so, as my students are answering questions and talking, I'm seeing how they're thinking, right? And oftentimes we write in ways that
Yeah.
are not too dissimilar from how we speak,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And so if you are talking in class and you can barely conjugate
A sentence.
verbs, right, correctly, and you submit an assignment to me
That's perfect.
that is written as if someone at the New York Times wrote this, I'm gonna have questions. Okay, I'm gonna have questions. We're gonna have to talk,
Yeah.
right? But I think also what I've been finding is that the best way to avoid the students using artificial intelligence is by crafting different types of assignments. So that requires, for some of us, we're going back to in-class
Assignment.
exams,
Hmm.
right? Um, I don't think students realize that the ability to write a paper from the comfort of your dorm room or the library at any hour of your choosing was a privilege, right?
Hmm.
And because they have abused that privilege, it has been revoked. So now we're going back to in-class examinations.
Oh, wow.
I also have my students do oral presentations, right? In that AI cannot organize their thoughts for them,
Yeah.
right? And so even if they use AI to put together the script, right? I don't fully mind that because I know that the requirements of the assignment are going to mandate that these students actually organize their thoughts and figure out which readings am I going to use to respond to this question, right? I sometimes have them come up with their own assignments, right? I'll say, hey, I want you to write, a one-page reflection in class on a topic of your choosing. I'm going to give you these three topics, and you come up with a question that you want to discuss, that you want to answer. And I find that those are the assignments that are really difficult for them to plagiarize. Now, there will always be students who are looking for the easy way out. They just want to skate by. And I think that those students do deserve strict consequences because I mean, I don't want to drive on a road that was built by someone who got their engineering degree by using AI to learn all of this stuff, right? Someone who won't be able to double check, right? Even if they use the algorithm to, come up with the calculation, someone who won't, who either doesn't know how to double check or doesn't think that it's important to go back and double check. I don't want to be operated on by somebody who, got through undergrad and med school just by plugging answers into, right, GPT. And so, because of that, I do tend to come down a little bit hard with the consequences, and I do think that it's up to universities to back the professors up. There are a lot of universities that say we don't you know your AI policy is your AI policy, and if a student rejects this policy or rejects the consequences that you give them for using AI, we're not gonna
Not backing you up.
we're not gonna back you up, which creates problems. And so I think it's up to the universities, the administration of these universities to support professors as they sort of implement these consequences. It's up to everyone, both professors, students, and administrators to articulate clearly sort of what the policies are for certain institutions, for certain departments, for certain classes. Like I know that there are some classes in which you can use AI for the assignments, right? The professors have maybe built that in, right? And so
Right.
students will say, well, if I can use AI for this person's class, why can't I use it
Yeah.
Yeah.
for your class, right? And it's like, well, we teach different
It's
things, and
different.
like different different professors have different, domains. And so I think we've got to be able to get on board, with each other and figure out a clear policy to articulate to them. And that is sometimes that looks like telling students whatever class you take with a professor, whatever their AI policy is, it is what it is. And so if they say that If you use GPT to write an essay and you weren't supposed to use it, that you failed that assignment, it is what it is, right? So those are sort of my thoughts. And a lot of my students at the beginning of the semester were like, oh, we can't use AI for your class. I can't believe this. Ugh, I don't know if I want to take your class then. But by the end of the semester,
It can.
they've learned a lot and they've walked away um, being capable of more critical thinking. They've walked away from the class, I think, just being more intelligent young people. And so it's almost like getting a toddler to eat vegetables,
Yeah.
right? It's like I know this broccoli may not taste
Yeah.
as good as, a piece of candy, but like when your teeth are strong and healthy
Mhm.
years now, you'll thank me later.
And I think
Awesome.
I'm happy to hear that those students at the end of it, uh, they realize the importance, or they realize the gift that you've given them. Yeah. You're not saying don't use AI. What you're saying is learn something and then use AI critically. And actually, it has its own benefit. If you use it in a critical way, it takes a lot of time to create what you think can be maybe original, because it's not just saying do this. You have to spend hours to say, okay, I want you to manipulate this, I want to do this, I want you to do this. But you're thinking of your goal. What is my ultimate goal? What you want you to create.
Mhm.
And that's important. Uh, I think we have come to the end of our time, but not the end of seeing you again and in our on our podcast, because this podcast needs people like you. And I'm so happy what you're giving the students. And those students are going to mature and become better citizens for the future. It's really wonderful to hear your stories, to hear how you're teaching them, and that as a professor, you're not just being comfortable and making it easier for yourself, but also making it very difficult, because if you're going to prepare a lot of things and all these motivating classes, they require a lot of work.
Mhm.
They require a lot of dedication, and that dedication is what we need. I think for my grandchildren to be, which are not still in the picture, I think I want teachers like you to teach them.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate this.
Yes.
This was a great conversation,
Mhm.
and yeah, thank you both for having me here to talk about these really important things.
Wonderful. So when we look at history, as you were mentioning history, that history is so important. It's knowledge, it's data, it's everything else. We know that education has evolved to meet the needs of our society. And today, I think we continue to witness perhaps the most consequential turning point that we are having. We look at the rising tuition fees. We look at the technological advances that we're seeing that are rapidly changing the workforces and the demands that we have, and how it's reshaping the educational system and the landscape in ways that you and I can no longer ignore. You and I need to sort of pay attention to, so that millions of people or learners can get access and get the opportunity to what is needed. The opportunity before us today is not simply for us to adapt to the new tools or everything that we have, but for each and every one of us, especially for our high institutional teachers, to reimagine what the future they want to leave behind is going to be in the students that they teach, because those are their next leaders that they are going to build. Is also to build a system that is more accessible, that is more equitable, a system that is genuinely preparing students for the future, a system that can transform and have people that are courageous enough to be willing to challenge the outdated structures that we have. People that are educators that are creative and willing to rethink of how a classroom today should be, so that they can continue to engage the students and actually ignite the critical thinking that we need in all of us, while ensuring that the environment that we have, or the growth in the students that we have, continues to be sustainable, that we continue to build an education system that does not simply respond to the future, but helps to create it and retains the critical thinking, which is actually the foundation of everything that will come out of the students we are teaching. So the question for today is that we are no longer going to ask whether education must change. I think the question that we need to ask is whether you and I are going to continue to lead the change, or we are going to allow it to lead us. It's up to us, you and I. And again, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming to bring this topic and eloquently speak to this topic. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening, because this is a subject that matters to you and to the children that will come after you. Over to you, pal.
What an insightful conversation we've had. As we wrap it up today, I'd like to state that as we navigate this era of transformation, one truth remains constant: that education changes lives. Now, potential unreached is potential wasted. Today, too many are still locked out by coasts, geography, or systems that were never designed with them in mind. The challenge ahead is not simply ensuring that opportunity exists, it is ensuring that it is within reach for all, without exception. We hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you for joining us on this journey to elevate and inspire. Until next time.